everyone. Welcome to another exciting HC Live. We are talking about property taxes today. It is the season for it, certainly. My name is Jennifer Chang. I'm with the Houston Chronicle, and here with me today, we have a very special guest. Roland Altinger is the chief appraiser for the Harris Central Appraisal District. Over his 35-year career at the district, he advanced in division leadership and in positions as taxpayer liaison, assistant chief, deputy chief, and since July 2016, chief appraiser. Frequent presenter and witness before Texas legislators, Altinger leads the largest U.S. appraisal district doing annual reappraisal for 1.9 million parcels of property. Whew. So almost 2 million parcels of property, let's just call it that, with a total market value of approximately 0.9 trillion. He holds several leadership positions in the appraisal industry, including IAAO senior instructor, past president of TAAD chapter, former trustee, Region 4, and he's also a graduate of TSU, an avid fisherman, and father of 3. I love that. Claire Goodman, I think you've seen her enough times at HC Live, but for those of you who don't know, she's a senior reporter at the Houston Chronicle covering the Katy area, and she also produces the Katy Insider newsletter, a must-read if you live there, sends every Monday and Wednesday. Caroline is a deputy data editor for the Houston Chronicle. Before coming to Houston, Caroline was the Austin American-Statesman, where she was part of a team selected as a Pulitzer finalist in public service. She trained in data journalism in multiple roles at the Associated Press and holds a journalism master's degree from Stanford. And before I hand things off to Claire, this event is sponsored by Novotny & Company. Claire, Caroline, and myself are journalists, and we produce this work with editorial independence, but we do appreciate the tax experts at Novotny & Company who want to support our work in getting this information and tools out there. So with that, thank you for joining us today for HC Live. I'm going to hand things off to Claire in a second, but if you have any questions about property taxes, the appraisal process, any questions for Roland, please drop them in the webinar chat, which is now enabled, so you should be able to do that freely, and I will be monitoring that, and we'll have time at the end to answer your questions. All right, with that, take it away, Claire.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We are discussing everyone's favorite topic, which is property taxes. And hopefully demystifying a lot of the process, especially if you want to go on to protest your appraisal, or even if you want to understand better what these property taxes are and where these numbers are coming from. So thank you guys, and Roland, especially thank you for being here with us. I know this is your busiest time of year. I, like close to 2 million people, just got my appraisal in the mail, and you know, it's something that comes every year. The number changes sometimes. And it seems a lot of times to be a nebulous thing. And Roland, I was hoping you could kick us off talking about where the HCAD gets those numbers from, what they mean, and how you arrive at that appraisal each year.
Sure, Claire. We have roughly, as Jennifer mentioned, 1.9 million parcels in the county that we're responsible for reappraising every year. And of those 1.9 million parcels, 1.2 are roughly residential properties. And I know that this segment was going to focus on residential properties. And what we do is we take and we geographically put all those properties in different neighborhoods geographically. We put them in there by property type. We then study the market. And I tell people what we do is we follow a market, and it is what buyers and sellers are doing in the marketplace. And we then take those sales, we look at the different sales by the neighborhoods, and right now we have roughly 7,000 residential neighborhoods in the county. We look at the conditions of the property. We look at as I stated, the recent purchase prices, and we look at the various amenities that drive that value, whether it's someone has a pool or someone doesn't, a gated community, non-gated community, et cetera. And with regards to that, we then value those properties, and we place the notices on the street for everyone to see the value that we've placed on those properties. As you know, you can't value 1.9 million parcels and not make some errors. And we try to eliminate as many as we can. But when we do, people have the due process rights to file a protest. And we can talk about that later on that. But the main thing is, when you look at your appraisal, we are doing what we call mass appraisal. Mass appraisal is looking at a group of properties and studying that and doing statistical testing on those properties to make sure that we have those values right before we place those notices on the street. It is contradictory to a fee appraisal, because a fee appraisal is done based on one property at a particular time And it's usually done when people buy their house, and the fee appraisal is required by the banking and lending institutions, so those folks can get loans on those properties. So it's a little bit different than fee appraisal, and it's mass appraisal, and we utilize statistical testing to get those values out there.
Excellent. And Caroline, you had done some of your some research alongside Roland. Can you speak to that to these numbers as well?
Sure. Like Roland said, mass appraisal is geared to maximize accuracy and uniformity, but it's still an automated process. That means that it might not always account for some of the key nuances that differentiate your home from all the other houses on your block. That's why we always recommend that you look at your appraisal values, the ones that you saw in your notice, with a critical eye. Be prepared to protest if you believe that your value is too high or too low compared to your local market conditions, so essentially sales that are happening around you, or with the appraisal that your neighbors are receiving. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later.
Excellent. And I know before we get going on discussing the protest process, there is something, Roland, you and I have talked about a lot, which is before you even go anywhere with worrying about where your tax appraisal is that you should be making sure you have your exemptions that you qualify for, have them lined up, make sure you are getting those exemptions. I know the homestead exemption is probably the as you've said before, the one most people qualify for. Can you just tell our viewers a little bit about that so that they are making sure they're getting that exemption?
Sure. Currently under the law, there's just right at a baker dozen exemptions that property owners can qualify for. Obviously, the general residential homestead is one of the easiest. Obviously, you have to own and occupy your property as of that date to qualify for the exemption. But we also have the over 65 exemption, the over 55 surviving spouse, the disability exemptions. And after the wars in the Middle East, we saw the legislatures create a lot of exemptions for disabled veterans. And that includes the disabled veterans and surviving spouses. And those get more detailed than just the regular general homestead exemption. But what I want to make sure that if you can go online, you can look at your exemption, or you can call our office to make sure you're getting that exemption. It will be displayed on the notice of value that you just received in the paper. But there's some major benefits with regards to having that exemption in place. One is the legislature in 1997 passed what they call a cap. And that means that if your market value is exceeding 10% a year, that means the taxable value cannot go up more than 10% a year. And we can talk specifics in it with examples, such as if your property was appraised at $400,000 and it was your homestead, and it's the second year you qualify for the homestead. And we have seen some crazy markets the last few years where we've seen increases of 25 to 30%. Well, that subsequent year of your market value, let's say it went up 25%, it would go up to 500,000. Well, that first year you would only be your taxable value, your cap value would be at 440,000, and then of course it would increase to 484,000 the third year until it met that market value. If the market value didn't stay, if it stayed the same. But the other thing is it reduces your tax liability, and there's two ways to get your values reduced. Your taxable values, obviously, you can get the exemption. And then the second thing that you can do is you can protest. I know we'll talk about protest in a second. But when you look at the tax savings on a $400,000 house, if you did not have an exemption, your taxes would be right at $8,000. With you having a general homestead exemption, your taxes would be at about $5,500. And if you had the over 65 or disabled, it'd be about $2,300. So we want to make sure that your viewers all are getting their exemption. So you can look at your notice and see if you're getting the exemption that you're entitled to. And if not, get online, file the other exemptions that you're not getting, and we'll be sure to make sure you get those exemptions.
I'm glad you pointed out those numbers, because that is a big difference, and that definitely matters. Personally, I just refiled my homestead exemption. It was not that difficult. So if you're kind of a little bit nervous about doing that, it's just get online. It's pretty straightforward once you actually jump into it. And then one more thing I wanted to talk about with you briefly, because it's something that in the process of reporting, I feel like I learned, and it makes me view the HCAD differently and, the appraisal process differently, is that HCAD is not actually the taxing authority. You guys do the appraisal values, you send out the notices, but you're not collecting the taxes. You're not making the decision on how much where the rate of the taxes and those kinds of things go. So I think it's important to viewers to kind of understand maybe where your position is. So if you could just kind of briefly explain what you do as the HCAD versus the taxing authorities that a lot of people, I think, kind of conflate you with.
And Claire, another great question. When you look at the appraisal districts, we're required to appraise all those properties as of January 1st. It's a statutory requirement. And my office is responsible for allowing property owners to get through the due process rights, and that would be the protest process that we're getting ready to start. And then, of course, we then certify the roll. The chief appraiser has the roll certified to the taxing jurisdiction, and this generally happens in the end of August. And then we pass all this information to the taxing jurisdictions. And in Harris County, there's over 500 taxing jurisdictions. This includes the county, the 34 cities, the 26 school districts, and all the conservation and reclamation districts or MUD districts. And then they set the tax rates and then start the billing and collection process. So if you were to differentiate between the two, we do the first half of the appraisal process, we do the due process rights, then we pass it on to the taxing jurisdictions. They then set the rates and start the collection process.
Yes, and thank you for explaining that. I definitely, when I started this reporting on this last year, I did not know. So, so I don't know if maybe some of our readers were a little confused as well. So now the part that everybody's excited to learn about, which is property taxes and potentially protesting them. And you guys are, we're so excited to talk about that. So again, thank you. So just basic question to start out. What is something that homeowners can be doing right now before they file a protest?
Well, one of the first things that I suggest folks to do is when they get their appraisal notice is to make sure that they've got their exemptions. And the second thing is they know their property better than anybody else. And what our statutory requirement is to place that market value on that property. I know everybody in every neighborhood has a real estate agent. I suggest contacting your real estate agent saying, hey, can you pull some comps to see if my property is valued correctly? The real estate agents are in the business to, as that's part of their business, is they're in the business to help folks out and look at those sales and compare those sales to what your property is appraised at. And then if you get that information and you still feel that our valuation is wrong, then file the protest. The protest has to be done by May 15th or 30 days after the appraisal notice has been mailed, whichever is the latter of the two. And those we're approaching that protest deadline this month, in fact, in 15 days. And when you have 1.9 million parcels, some of those appraisal notices don't get out before April 15th. So some of the deadlines have gone past the May 15th, but just associate May 15th with April 15th. Again, those comparables are the best mechanisms, best things to utilize to compare your property to those ones that have sold and what they've sold for.
And I'm also really excited to say that the Houston Chronicle has developed a tool this year to help you prepare for protesting your property taxes. And I've never seen anything like it. It is so cool. If you guys are subscribers, you have access to it. If you're not a subscriber, we've got some great deals going on, but please check it out because it's really a step-by-step. I hate to say hand-holding, but kind of. If you're like me and you've never done anything like this before, it's a great tool. And Caroline you basically developed it. So if you could step in and tell us how people can be preparing for this using the Houston Chronicle tool, that is so exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I see some of you guys are asking about the real estate agent that Roland mentioned. Well, if you don't have a real estate agent and you want to figure out if your home, how it stacks up to other homes down your block, down the street, you can use our tool to check that out. Keep in mind that in Texas, you have a constitutional right to fair and uniform taxation. When it comes to property taxes, that means that if your home and your neighbor's homes are virtually the same, they should be appraised similarly. And they should be taxed similarly. If they're not, then you have excellent grounds for a protest. We know that finding homes that are comparable to yours what agents will call comps, what Roland is calling comps, can be pretty time consuming. We also know that folks will sometimes have to hire things like people like real estate agents, or find all that technical knowledge that isn't always super easy to find online. And so we put together a tool that does a lot of it for you guys, and we have a little demo for you today. All right, so we're on the Houston Chronicle's homepage. From there, we can jump into our guide. You can see it's right there on the top menu. Once you get to our guide, you'll find a number of very helpful resources, some great reporting from Claire, really great advice that we got from Roland and other folks at HCAT. And if you scroll all the way down, you'll see a box that says prepare your case. This is where the tool lives. Go ahead and click that try it button to jump directly to the tool. Once you get to the tool, in that search bar, make sure that you enter your address to get all of the custom information that we've built specifically for you and for your home. Now, keep in mind that when you pull this up, you'll see information about your home and information about your comps. Now, we didn't make up any of this information. The tool selects comps the same way that HCAT does. We replicated their algorithm. So what you see here is very similar to what the HCAT appraisers and the appraisal review board will be looking at when you protest. The only difference is that HCAT picks 5 comps that it thinks are the best matches. We show you all of them. In this case, we can see that there are 44. If you click that plus button, like we just did, there we go. You can see some more information about how we selected those comps. You can also hover over any of those question marks if you want more information about what different things mean. And as you scroll down, you can click on the other drop downs, those other pluses, to get more information about how your home stacks up to other homes. So we can see that this particular home that we looked up, the value seems to be a little bit higher than other comparable homes in the area. Now, just because your value is higher doesn't mean that your appraisal was unfair or that it was inequitable. It just means that your value is higher. You may have grounds to protest, or your home might be highly unique. To find out more about how your home stacks up to other homes, make sure that you scroll down to this table that we're showing you, and you can click on any of these properties to get more information. We can go ahead and click the first one to see what kind of information you see. All the way at the top, that blue bar will show you more information about your home. So in this case, we can see the owner, beds, bath, and stories, the condition of the home, and different values over time. Now, once you find other homes that you think are comparable to yours, you can go ahead and use those stars to the right to select them and to highlight them. And when you're ready with all of your selections, you can scroll all the way to the bottom or to the top and click print or save PDF. That's going to create a neat little PDF that you can bring to HCAT, to your protests, or to your hearing, and that you can use to protest your property taxes.
So basically, the tool does all your homework for you. And that is really incredible. And Caroline, I got to say, I'm so impressed by it. And I hope you guys find it. Yeah, we got some comments. Awesome tool. Yes, I completely agree. So be sure to check it out. I mean, these are, this could potentially save you a lot of money, or at least, give you the peace of mind that you are being fairly, you've been fairly appraised. So that's very exciting. We're all around the Houston Chronicle. We're really thrilled about it. And so thank you, Caroline. So we had a few questions, Caroline, you had mentioned a few case studies that sort of stood out to you on the process of looking through some of these values and sort of setting up this tool. Were there any of them that you wanted to talk to Roland about that might benefit our viewers so that they could maybe get sort of an inside track into what some of these numbers mean that maybe don't make sense, even though you've broken it down, they still look like numbers?
Yeah, for sure. When you use our tool, you'll see that we'll tell you how your home compares to comps, but we won't tell you why. That's mostly because there's a million reasons why your home's value might be different from your neighbor's value. Now, Roland here can't probably speak to everyone's homes and what's happening with every individual one, but I know that there's some broader trends that are happening across the city. So maybe you can start off with some examples. For instance, if we have a complex of homes that were all built around the same time, say 15 years ago, similar building materials, similar area, I mean, they're all next to each other and they kind of look the same. Might there be any reason why the values could be different?
Absolutely. And I'm going to digress just a second and just state that, taxes in the state of Texas shall be at market value and equally appraised. The first part of what I was mentioning is getting the comps, and that would establish the market value. And then, of course, Caroline, y'all's information and tool that y'all developed is dealing with the equity part. And it is very, I like what y'all have done in that's what we have to do. We have to bring the comps for market value and the comps for unequal appraisal for the preponderance of the evidence when the property owner files a protest. But the main thing is when you look at what a property compared to your property, we call it CDU, which stands for condition, desirability, and utility. And the condition of the property, I know that when we went through some of the properties that y'all were referring to, we looked at those characteristics such as, was it remodeled or was it not remodeled? Was it a partial remodel, an extensive remodel, or a total remodel? And when was that remodel done? What was the age of the property? Some of the repairs and maintenance that had been done on that property, such as a complete roof replacement because of derecho, and the comparable does not have that roof. You can look at desirability also. The location of that property. How is it located in that neighborhood? Is it on a major thoroughfare? And the houses are one block off that major thoroughfare, so though they don't have to deal with the traffic. The size of the property plays a big part, whether you're on a corner lot or interior lot. Some of the amenities, what we call the utility, if you're in a area in the Heights where it's a 3 1-bedroom house versus a 3-bedroom 2-bath house, that utility plays a big role. Finally, whether you have a pool or not. So we call that the condition, desirability, and utility. And that's where some of the comparisons that you and I looked at could be driving factors of some of those changes.
What are some of the things that we might want to think about if we're looking at new construction in some of the cities, for instance, historical neighborhoods? Will the values between a new home and a home that was built 20 years ago but being renovated this year, will those be comparable?
Oh, no, they won't be comparable in that, you've got a brand new house that is built with the modern technology that exists versus an older house. So what we generally do is, if you're looking at a neighborhood that's going through gentrification, make sure that you're looking at all new houses if you're in a new house, or if you're in an older house that's been remodeled, look at remodeled houses that have been built in similar years or have the same amount of remodeling.
And is there a stage during the protest process where we can ask some of these questions as homeowners to folks at HCAD?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I tell people, God did not descend down from heaven and we've got the values right. And in the informal process, we settle about 80% of those values with property owners one-on-one. You do not need to be intimidated. Come in, speak with the appraiser. You know your property better than anybody else. Give them what you feel diminishes the value of that property. Show them the information that you have, and we'll show the information we have. And then the appraiser, he or she will make a recommendation of value to the property owner.
That sounds great.
So leading up to this event, we had some reader questions that came in that, especially some of them that seem to be recurring, and I was hoping we could talk about those. Roland, something that you have said is that don't ever hesitate to protest your taxes if you don't think the number is right. But something we heard from a lot of realtors specifically was, actually, if you're thinking of selling your house, don't protest. What are your thoughts on that? And why do you think that is? Why do you think realtors are telling people, giving them that advice?
Well, a lot of people look at the HCAD website or websites on properties with regards to property taxation. And I suggest folks that it is your opinion of value. And when that real estate salesperson comes to your house and says, what would you like to sell the property for? They're going to give you comps, and they're going to tell you it's your opinion of value, what you want to put that property on the market for. I don't know why someone wouldn't protest, because that's a direct correlation with regards to the property taxes they pay. Of course, I don't want 1.9 million protests either. When you look at the population of properties that we have, we've got roughly 25% of those that will file a protest. And that's where we've made an error. You know, the one thing I do want to talk about when you got your notice in your mailbox, we have developed a lot of web-based solutions to do this process without leaving the comforts of your home. The first one, of course, is what we call iFile, and that's where you get your notice on in the mail. You look at your 13-digit account number, you look at the iFile that's unique to that property. You get online and you can file your protest. We developed that way back in 2004. But the next one is what you can do is you can elect to what we call iSettle. And that's where you can opt in to us reviewing the evidence. And we have the capability for you to upload the evidence that you want to present for your property. And you upload that information, we review that. And then we give you an electronic opinion of value. If you receive that electronic opinion of value and you're happy, you don't have to leave the comforts of your home. You do your protest online, you receive your notice online. If you're still not happy, you will still receive due process rights where you can come in and do your hearing in the office.
So just to make sure I understand it properly, the iSettle sort of bypasses the informal hearing part of the process, correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
Another question, another reader submitted question we wanted to just ask you about was, there was a reader wrote in and she said that she filed her taxes, or sorry, filed a protest for her taxes. And she felt like the next year there was quote unquote retribution from the HCAT office because she went to a protest. Is there any, can you kind of speak to that, where your office position is, and maybe allay some of those fears that people have about filing a protest?
Oh, that is totally false. We do not go back and look if someone protested the previous year. There's nothing of that sort that occurs in this office. We relook at all values, and as stated earlier, we're the largest appraisal district in the galaxy that does a complete reevaluation every year. And we have to, because of the statute, the way it's written, taxes have to be equal and uniform. And sometimes someone will come out of an ARB hearing. The ARB hearing is if we cannot settle your value informally in an informal meeting with an appraiser one-on-one. The ARB is what a group of impartial citizens, they listen, they're set in panels of 3, and they listen to your case, they listen to the appraisal district case, and then they make a recommendation of value based on what's presented. And then, of course, the next year, the market changes. And I say the market changes. We've seen market change in the last few years considerably. And when I say considerably, the few years ago, we were seeing 25–30% increases. And this year, I'm sitting here looking at the inventory. What you've had is you've had interest rates increase. And if you look at the purchasing power of a house 2.5 years ago, when interest rates were at 2.5%, you look at that 30-year mortgage, and the principal and the interest, not the tax insurance, just the principal and interest, was roughly $1,600. If you now were to say, I'm going to have a $1,600 payment in today's world with interest rates at 6.5%, you could only afford a $250,000 house as opposed to a $400,000 house a few years ago. So that's one of the driving factors which has slowed the market up. And I say it slowed the market up. We've gone from inventory of a few years ago of roughly a month to 4.6 months. And that has been assisted with the increase in interest rates. And then that inventory, what you do is you're going from a seller's market to a buyer's market, in essence. And that's what we're seeing right now.
Well, and I appreciate you addressing that. I think one of the main reasons, or a big reason why we want to bring you on here too, is to kind of help people understand that you guys are, you know, you're a friendly entity. There's no retribution happening. We're going to switch over to the audience questions here in just a minute, but we did have one more question for you guys. And that is, were there any trends this year that maybe surprised you? I know you were just talking right now about how the real estate market is different this year and recently than it's been in a while. Was there anything that really jumped out at you as you did the appraisals this year?
Yes, Claire, and matter of fact, there was. What we saw is when we look at the strata of values of properties that we appraised, and I'm going to have to look at my notes here. We've strata the properties from under 124,000 and 125 to 199, all the way up to 750,000 dollars and higher. And in those top few stratas of the $400,000 house and above, we saw more increases in those properties than we did the lower priced properties. But when you look at the notices that we have on the street of the residential parcels at this point in time, what we're seeing is of the almost 1.1 million parcels that we've noticed, we're seeing no change in 13%. And we're seeing increases in around 56%, but we're seeing a decrease of almost 32% in parcels. And that, of course, goes to those 7,000 different geographical neighborhoods that we've got, where you are in the city and what the buyers and sellers are doing and what is the inventory and the new houses that are built in those property areas. So that was one thing that we did see, is the increase in the higher priced properties. And by the way, all this information is available on our website at hcad.org. They can go to it and go under appraisals and see the markets.
And Caroline, I know that in studying the numbers to put this tool together and the data behind it, you had some observations as well. Did you want to share some of those?
Sure. We have a preview for you guys of an investigative series that the Houston Chronicle has been working on. We took a closer look at some of the longer term trends that are taking hold in Harris County. The key takeaways so far are that if you live in the Houston area, which is the west side of the city of Houston, the wealthier area sandwiched between Interstate 10 to the north and Interstate 69 to the south, chances are that you've seen a pretty modest increase in your market value. We're seeing 30, maybe 50%. Plus, you're probably protesting every year, or you have for the last decade, and you're claiming a homestead exemption. So you're following all of the advice that we've been talking about today. However, if you live outside of the arrow, especially in gentrifying low-income neighborhoods in the east side of Houston, your market value has probably been ballooning over the past, especially 5 or 6 years. You're less likely to claim a homestead exemption, and you're probably not protesting. We're seeing a lot of homeowners in that area who have never protested, not in the last 10 years, not in the last 20 years. That means that your property taxes have skyrocketed recently. In some areas, we've seen them go up to 10 times their original value 10 years ago. So this is a pretty new development. It kind of follows some of the trends that Roland was talking about, but there's a whole lot more there happening. We'll have more for you in about 2 weeks. Keep checking the Houston Chronicle homepage for more developments and our social media pages if you want to learn more about how this is affecting homeowners all across Harris County.
Thank you.
All right. So, wow, y'all really showed up with the questions and the comments. So thank you again for submitting those. I've been trying to just copy and paste them as we go along. So, and I see so many of them coming through. We will not, I think, get to every question today, but, you know, I encourage you to check out our guide. We only did a demo for the tool, but everything else on there, there's lots of utility content. So basically just like it takes you step by step through everything. It actually answers so many of the questions I'm seeing here in the chat. So I want to just make another plug for that. You can see it at houstonchronicle.com/property taxes. That's houstonchronicle.com/property taxes. Or you can go to the houstonchronicle.com website. Right on the front page on the nav bar, it says property tax guide. You click on that, it takes you straight there. So, and you know, and I know a lot of people, I also see this as a common recurring question. This will be recorded. This will be posted on our YouTube channel. So you can replay it as many times as you'd like and watch it over and over again. So getting those out of the way first. So lots of questions. A lot of people are having, they're concerned that their exemptions are not going to appear on their appraisal, or just we had a lot of questions about exemptions in general. So someone asked, you know, I was told once you file a homestead exemption and it will stay on your account forever unless you remove it. Is that true? Will exemptions always appear on your appraisal? Do you ever need to renew them?
And to answer that question, we used to have all that information on our website where you could go on and see if you had the homestead, the over 65, and legislation passed a law that said that we can just put that you've got the exemption on there. And so what it would state is if you had your homestead and you're over 65 or disabled, it would just show multiple. You can, and that's why when we send out that appraisal notice, it will show it on that. It was more for protection of folks that are senior or disabled, where people were screen scraping our data and then attacking the folks that were over 65 or disabled. But to answer your question, your exemption, you have to apply. And once you qualify for that exemption, you get that exemption forever. We've got a mobile app that you can apply that you can use to apply to get that exemption. It's very user friendly with your driver's license, because to get any type of exemption, your Texas driver's license or state issued ID has to match the property that you're applying for the exemption. Once you get it, we've got a law that says we have to audit those exemptions every 5 years. And we've got different mechanisms that we utilize to audit that. But but that doesn't mean you have to apply every year. You only have to apply if we ask you to reapply, or we find something that causes us to requalify your exemption. And that does occur, but it's on there as long as you own and occupy that house.
Great. And this also applies to the homestead exemption too. I think a lot of folks were worried that you had to reapply for the homestead every 5 years was something.
And you know what, believe it or not, Jennifer, that's a rumor that's going out there. I've talked to various media folks, and it just states that the appraisal district has to audit that. But you for example, you might have a house where a husband and wife own the house, but maybe it's a second marriage and the wife's name is on the property and the wife passes away. Well, the husband inherited the house and the documents are not in our records or have not been filed in the county clerks, which would then cause us to make the change in the exemption because the one spouse passed. So it caused us to send out a notice. And in situations like that, it's best to make sure that you get the records correct. And then of course we will re-grant the exemption once we receive that information. And that happens here and there.
And Roland, if you know that you qualify for an exemption, but it's not on your notice, how can you fix that?
Oh, you get online and use that mobile app that we have, make sure your driver's license matches and apply for that exemption and we'll grant it. Right now, the exemption deadline was April 30th, which was yesterday, but the statute has a loophole in there that you can go back and get that exemption for 2 previous years. So if some listener sees their notice and they say, well, I've lived here 2 years, apply for that exemption and make sure you put that previous year on there, and we'll go back and grant that previous exemption for the previous year if they qualify. And then of course that will avail themselves of that 10% cap I mentioned earlier. So if you've got the property and it was valued at $200,000 last year and it's valued at $240,000 this year, it would only be taxable at $220,000 with a market value of $240,000.
And while we're talking about exemptions, is there any I'm getting questions, but is there any if you qualify for it, even if you have multiple exemptions, they all apply, correct? There's not you can only have 1 or 2. It's if it's applicable and there are standards to which they're applicable, then you can. There's not a limit to how many exemptions can be applied to your account, correct?
It's really just one exemption. You're entitled to one homestead exemption, but that homestead exemption could mean that the person that's living in it is over 65. So they would get the homestead and the over 65.
Correct. Yes. Okay.
At our last board of directors meeting, one of my board members, Kyle Scott, mentioned that we need to really focus on some of the veterans exemptions, and we're getting ready to make some changes on that. So make sure that if you're a veteran, to contact our office to make sure that you're getting every exemption that you're entitled if you are a veteran.
Great. All right. So let's see. And there's one more exemptions questions before we move on. There is a lady who early happy birthday. She turned 65 next month. So does the over 65 exemption apply to this woman, or does she have to do that for next year?
No, that's another great question, Jennifer. Most of the exemptions are you qualify them based on the date that you qualify. And so what I suggest to the lady that asked that question is just make sure that she sends in a copy of her driver's license or gets on our mobile app and uploads her driver's license to show that she's over 65, and we will grant that over 65 exemption based on her over 65th birthday. Now, what will take place is her notice will just have a homestead exemption in it, but once we get it in as soon as possible, and when we certify the tax rolls later on in the year, it will get certified to the taxing jurisdictions to show that she has the homestead and the over 65 exemption.
Great. All right, let's move on to, we have a lot of questions about appraised values and unequal appraisals. So how does appraised value reduce when an Airbnb starts next door? And so I imagine this is someone who lives in a residential home and maybe their neighbor decided to rent out their home frequently on Airbnb. Is that something that would possibly impact the market value of a home?
I don't know about an Airbnb, and I say I don't know about an Airbnb in that sense. We look at what we call external obsolescence. And I mean, if you're in a gated community and someone's renting out an Airbnb and they're having parties till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, there's restrictions in the homeowner association that probably restrict some of that from happening. But it is a good question because external forces such as having a convenience store next to you or being on a major thoroughfare or backing up to an apartment complex, that goes back to that CDU I was talking about earlier, condition, desirable, and utility. Backing up to a major thoroughfare, I mean, you get the noise close to an airport, the different tiers that come off an airport. So we've gotten very sophisticated with the airports because the tiers of how fast the jets can take off and how much power they can push on those engines till they get to a certain altitude. So all those things do have an effect, but I don't have a case study on Airbnbs that are next to you. But obviously that would come into other people in that neighborhood of those 7,000 residential neighborhoods that are buying and selling. So when someone's coming in and they buy that house, obviously it'd be reflective of the market.
Roland, let me ask you this. If that affects the noise level in the neighborhood, will that affect your house value?
On the airports, I'd say no, because we've delineated those different tiers that come off of IAH and Hobby Airport. The noise level from someone next door, I mean, I don't know how to quantify that, but it would come out with the purchase prices of other properties that are close to that Airbnb or that external obsolescence.
There's a lot of questions, and this is often something that we get asked to, and we address this a little bit in our guide, but I'm curious, a lot of people want to know your take on property tax firms and, you know, there's a lot of different companies and consultants out there and firms. So what's your personal take on that?
Well, you know, I tell people if it's their homestead and it's their property, they know their property better than anybody else. Obviously, we could not get our job complete if it weren't for the property tax consultants, because we get roughly 500,000 protests a year, and of those, 80% are represented by property tax consultants. And you know, there's no emotion involved in that. But we're not here to protect the tax base. We're here to fairly allocate that tax base. And the other part of that is, you know, if you come in and you get a $10,000 reduction, some of the tax consultants base their fees on a contingency fee or a flat fee. And they would have to, depending on if they were at a 50% structure, they'd have to get the value twice as low to result in the same types of tax savings. But like I said, we cannot do our job without them because we don't have enough parking here to bring in 500,000 people during the summer. And we do about 2,500 to 3,000 hearings a day. And we welcome either way that you do the protest process.
There is a reader who dropped this in the chat as a question. This is kind of a specific scenario, but it raises a larger question. You know, I know we talked about mass appraisals and, you know, this is, what does the algorithm do? What do people do? There's a woman who wrote, someone from HCAD knocked on my door asking me questions about a permit and if I had done any renovations. Is that allowed? What is my obligation? I did not have anything official on hand to tell him. So I'm wondering if this happened to one person, maybe it's happened to some other homeowners. Is this something that you can expect to see an appraiser at your door? Curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, another great question. There's a USPAP standard, Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, and a process where we have to go and look at all the properties at least every 4 to 6 years. But on top of that, if you're doing anything to your property, such as any kind of remodeling, such as plumbing and electrical, you're required to take out a permit. And all those permits we receive, thus we then go out and look at those properties also. And we get about 40,000 permits a year where we go look where someone's done some additions, they've done some remodeling, and you know, it's easiest for the property owner to assist with the questions that the appraiser has, because we cannot see what's actually being done behind those closed doors. And we do not want our appraisers going in the houses of these folks. And if you're there, you can explain to the appraiser, you know, I just did a partial remodel. I just did my kitchen, or I did a total remodel. So part of our algorithms and the systems that we use in mass appraisal, if we have a mistake in the system of we couldn't determine or decipher whether it was a total remodel or an extensive remodel, that could change the value that we put on the property. And so providing that information is helpful for us to make sure our records are correct.
And Roland, just because someone isn't showing up at your door doesn't mean that HCAD isn't updating data about your home in their databases. Is that right? I know that you've spoken about satellite imagery and how HCAD's using that more and more these days.
Oh yeah, Caroline, that's a great question. We have aerial overview, aerial oblique imagery where we can measure a property without going to the property, but we still go to the property and to make sure our observation on the condition and desirability is what we're seeing. And we have street level imagery also that we have to utilize. So there is a multitude of ways we're looking at your property because you're at work when we're at work, and that's what's happening. And sometimes we catch you when you're at home. In fact, years ago when I lived in Friendswood, the appraiser was actually showing up the one morning when I was leaving. And they actually worked for me, and they're like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "Well, this is my house. You're doing your job." And as I was leaving,
That's a great little story. This is
Jennifer, before you go on, I just want to make sure that, you know, there are nefarious activities that occur in our community. Make sure that the appraisers are wearing a vest or a hat that differentiates them from someone else out there. We want to make sure that that occurs. And if the property owner is concerned that this appraiser doesn't look like they should be there, call our office at 713-812-5800, and we'll make sure that we get you in contact with someone that says, yes, that appraiser is out there. They do work for us and they're doing their job, if the property owner is uncomfortable.
That's a great flag. Thank you for that reminder. And actually, because there have been so many questions and so many very specific scenarios, you know, and we can't get to every question. I also want to encourage, you know, you mentioned the HCAD number, which you can find easily online and even on your appraisal. I truly recommend if there's any like very specific granular issue, that is something that you should be raising with HCAD, and they are very friendly and approachable, as Roland is. So, you know, please don't hesitate if there's a very specific situation to flag that. But here's another question, and this actually just came in. Why, and I know a little bit of the history around this, so I'm teeing this up for you. Why are the comparable sales not made readily available through the HCAD website? And, you know, and I know you've mentioned speaking to your realtor about finding those comps, finding that sales data. And I believe at one point that was available online, correct? And Roland, do you want to just kind of address that a little bit?
Oh, I remember it really well. It was prior to 2005. And what took place is we'd put the value notices on the street, and the property owners would come in, and I was the taxpayer liaison officer, and they'd sit there and say, hey, where did you come up with this value? And we were able to provide those property owners with sales information based on their geographical area and their market data. They would look at it, they would see, hey, look, those sales look good, and I'm not going to protest, or those sales don't look good, and I'm going to file a protest. But in 2005, the Texas Association of Realtors did not want that information out there. So we had to remove all those sales. And what took place is we cannot provide that evidence until the property owner files that protest. Once they file that protest, the preponderance of the evidence is on our shoulders to make sure that we provide that information for the market value and the unequal appraisal. And that's when you get that information. So for a precursor, it was just easier for me to say, get in contact with your real estate agent, have them provide some of the comps for your neighborhood. You can look at them. You get advice from them, and then just determine whether you want to file a protest or not. And the reason I say that is, of those 500,000 protests that we get, there's what we call no show, no change. And property owners file their protest. They then get the information, they review it, they see that we're in line with what their property should be valued at, and then they don't show up for that hearing. So it's just decrease some of the protests that we have.
And to
Sure.
clarify, Roland, that won't penalize you this year or next year or any time in the future, will it?
No, ma'am, it will not penalize.
I would imagine the ARB is probably breathing a sigh of relief for like, all right, we got another no show and moving down the line. So there be if you were to reach out for your realtor, this is actually a question that was asked a few times. What is the period of dates that you would look for in terms of sales comps?
That is a great question. I tried to look a few months either side of that January 1 assessment date, but with my comments earlier stating that the market has slowed down, and I say it slowed down, the inventory's increased. And if you look at, for example, the year-over-year changes, the average increase for sales price from last year to this year increased at 2.5% across Harris County. And then, of course, the median price increased from 1.5%. So you got to look at the sales and see what the market's doing.
Good advice. This is a question that someone said, and this may be a rumor, so maybe you can do some debunking or some, clarifying here. If you went to the ARB, so this is the formal hearing step, and you got a value that was good, that value was good for 2 years unless HCAD could prove otherwise. Is that true? Is that false? Is this something that just gets reassessed every single year, and you've got to protest again every year if you feel the appraisal was unfair?
It is false. We have to make sure that we have sufficient data that shows that we can raise that value after that ARB hearing, and that's false.
And this is a little bit more newsy. Hurricane Beryl came through last year and, probably affected so many homes. I know it certainly affected homes in my neighborhood. Is that something that the appraisal district will consider as damage done from Hurricane Beryl? Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. In fact, we were looking at some properties recently where we had some of the folks that had damage from Beryl or derecho, and they have not made those repairs yet. And that goes back to why we would send appraisers back out there to the field. And let's just say that the damage was in the back of the house and the appraiser could not get to the back of the house. They looked at the aerial information and it looked like they fixed it. There still could be damage with that property and they need to bring it to our attention. If we've taken that house and brought it back to its original condition prior to the damage. And, an easy way to look at that, Jennifer, is an accountant in this county that I know had a tree fall through their house and it literally cut the house in half. And it was one of those big pine trees that we have in the county. And what they ended up doing is they had to rebuild the structure and the frame of the house. They had to re-roof the house. And if you look at it from the outside, it looks like it is perfectly done. However, since I know this individual, I've gone in the house and it's not complete inside. So that would be a driving factor where we don't know what's inside of that house. And if that information were brought to our attention, we would obviously make that correction with the pictures and anything that they would provide to assist with that valuation.
That's great. And I know this is, kind of leads in really nicely to one of the last questions is, this was covered in our guide, but, it's something that people wonder, it's whether it's hurricane damage, whether it's, just foundation issues, cracks in the ceiling, whatever, like those are things that if you do have them, and this is maybe like more of a comment than a question, it is useful to get an estimate beforehand from a contractor, correct? And so you can bring that with you to your protest if that is something that you have, where if you already know you need a new roof because of damage from a hurricane, coming in with that quote is a really easy way for your office to recognize that there is like a monetary value attached to to this damage. So I know that's only something that could help you.
Absolutely. I tell people, not only can you bring in the estimate for the repairs, bring in pictures. And I'll say that, just a foundation issue in this county, there's certain areas in this county where the black gumbo's underneath some of these houses, and that house can have some severe cracks. And our system is set up, if it has foundation issues, we give a certain dollar amount for that foundation problem. But bringing in pictures that show that there's a lot more damage or that estimate, those will help the property owner if they bring that information in.
That's great. And then you would, just to clarify, because this is now coming in as the live question, you would need that estimate before filing and before the hearing?
No, no, as long as you had it for the hearing. And when I say before filing, go ahead and file the protest, but put forth a valiant effort to get that before your hearing is scheduled. But if your hearing is scheduled, the law says that you can reschedule that hearing, and that's our third part of our web-based solutions called iReschedule, so they can get online and reschedule their hearing to a date that gives them sufficient time to get that estimate.
That's great.
And
That's
one other thing I want to mention is we've got some videos on hcad.org under help, and it talks about how to get your exemptions, the protest process. We've got a plethora of videos out there, and I suggest your viewers on some of these questions, because I'm looking at the chat feature and we could spend all day here answering all these questions. And I know y'all would love to do that, but I've got to go and y'all have got to do. And this has been too much fun, and definitely go to the HCAD website to get some answers to these videos
Absolutely.
answers to these questions we couldn't answer.
Yes. The HCAD website, of course, is our much of the primary source of all of this information. Thank you again, Roland, for your time. Thank you, Caroline, Claire. So again, this whole recording, this whole event will be available on our YouTube channel tomorrow. If you want to visit the tool again, it's at houstonchronicle.com/property taxes. Any other specific HCAD issues, please don't hesitate to reach out to HCAD. Thank you again for spending your time with us today. Everyone, take care.
Yes, thank
Bye.
y'all. Bye-bye.